All right, hello YouTube. Welcome to the newest Dark Tower Palaver episode, which is a book club. It is a little bit different than normal. I think I talked about it a little bit last time as to why we are going out of order. But yeah, ready for part 10 of the Wizard and Glass book club. So welcome. I guess I need to change my thing over to top or live chat, not top chat. There we go. Hello, Brocky. I don't know if you sent that right as I changed it, or if I changed it, it showed it to me. But I am now seeing the chat there. Awesome. Stupid top chat thing is annoying on YouTube. All right, yeah. So let's dive right in. Let me go ahead and hit the intro, and then we can get started. Yeah, dive right into the next portion of the Wizard and Glass flashback section.
The Dark Tower by Stephen King. The man in black fled across the desert, and the gunslinger followed. Go then. There are other worlds than these. Death, but not for you, gunslinger. It's time we had our own palaver, I think, and it's going to take a while.
And yet, dauntless, the slug horn to my lips I set, and blew. Child Roland to the Dark Tower came.
We are content, one from many. Let the palaver begin.
Hello and welcome to Dark Tower Palaver. This is the podcast covering Stephen King's magnum opus, the Dark Tower series. My name is Tad, and I am here for book club number 10 for Wizard and Glass. First episode of February here. If you if you don't listen to the book clubs, you may be unaware as to why we're doing a book club now. Generally speaking, we do roundtables first and then book clubs second in the month. But basically, if you are tuning in expecting a roundtable, the reason I am flip-flopping it is because we have the upcoming March Insanity fan vote coming up, and we basically are down to a fortnight to send in your nominations. Actually, just shy of that. I think I was saying the day before the next episode is when all the submissions were due for nominations. Submit as many ideas as you want, and I'll get to the topic in just a second. By the 23rd, which is 13 days from today, and then 2 weeks from today on the episode on the 24th, which the reason we flip-flopped it is because I wanted a roundtable to be able to announce, we know what the topic is, but I wanted to announce the top 16 things which are actually making the bracket, and then it'll be a short 6 days after that episode. The fan vote starts on the 1st of March. So March Insanity, 16 poll. So basically how we're doing it. So first of all, the topic, and I know I need to get into the intro stuff as well, but I guess I can go out of order and hit this stuff. So we've done the March Insanity a number of times now. In 2019, we voted on the most hated Dark Tower character, which is Rhea of the Coos. And then we let it slip for a while, and then in 2022 we brought it back, and we did the mirror image to that and did the most beloved Dark Tower character. And by a single vote, Eddie Dean beat out Oi the Brave. So that is our most beloved Dark Tower character. And then last year, 2023, we did the best Dark Tower moment, which ended up being the showdown at the Traveler's Rest. Of course, in the book club context, may not know what that means, at least not yet, but very soon. And then this year, though, we have announced basically the alternate, kind of the mirror version of that, which is worst Dark Tower moments. There's been a little bit of confusion on that, so basically what we're looking for here is not necessarily a meta thing, like, oh, I don't really like that Stephen King waited 7 years between books, or I don't like that Stephen King chose to do this or that. I can't say a lot because it's a book club, but we don't necessarily want that. What we're looking for is moments. It could be, their tragic moments. It could be their moments that absolutely drive you insane and make you want to punch your book. It could be any number of things, any negative things that happen in the series. Like I said, think of Rhea of the Coos or Eddie Dean being the characters. Again, I'm not going to go too deep, but Showdown at the Traveler's Rest was the best moment in the entire series. So what's the worst moment would be kind of the alternate to that. Like, what moments do you absolutely hate seeing? For instance, I know one off the top of my head would be something like Susan getting hit with the brick as a small child, or Susanna, I'm sorry, getting hit with a brick as a small child, or being pushed in front of the train. There's things like that. I'm saying all those because those are in the past. This is a book club. We avoid spoilers going forward. But that's what we're looking for, is moments that you just absolutely hate in the book. And it could be for any number of reasons. It could be a character that you just absolutely despise, and there's a certain scene that they really get under your skin. It could be anything like that. But that is what we're looking for. And the way that we do it is the worst for the nomination process that is due in 13 days. Get them sent in on social media or email, whatever. I'll give you all the details for that in just a second. But basically, send in as many as you want to nominate, and don't worry about if you are on social media and you saw other people saying what you wanted. Send yours in as well, because basically what I do is I'm going to compile all of that data, and then what I'm going to do is the ones that are mentioned the most often are going to be the ones that actually make the 16, the top 16, which will make the bracket. And then come March 1st, we will start voting weekly. Each round of the bracket is a week-long vote, and then we'll narrow it down until it'll be finished at the end of March. And then come April 1st, I'll pop on here on YouTube. No jokes, of course, because April's Fools cannot be something when we're dealing with something like March Insanity results. I'll come on and do a short video and announce the winner, and then on the next episode we'll talk about it as well if you don't follow us on YouTube and you are more of a podcast listener. So that's what we'll do. So please send in your nominations. Again, you have until the 23rd. That gives me the time to wrap all that up and then get the bracket built out for the next day for the episode, which again is 2 weeks from today, which is the roundtable. So that is why we flip things around. And then let me go ahead and jump into the intro stuff, because I threw things out of order, because why not? Chaos and mayhem. First of all, there is no spoiler warning. With these episodes, we stay where we're at or before. We don't jump ahead. Now, the only caveat to that is there is now a spoiler section at the very end of the episode, but I make sure that there is an audible as well as a visual indicator. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll see your screen change, and then audibly you'll hear an alarm telling you that we're moving to spoiler section. So there's no way for you to just accidentally stumble into that, and it is the very, very tail end of the show. I would say, generally speaking, it's maybe 1 or 2% of the actual episode. So it's just the very, very end when you hear that warning. If you haven't finished all 7 books of the Dark Tower series, you can sign off at that point, but these should be 99% of this episode should be safe for you to listen to. Next up, if you want to follow or find the podcast, you can find us on any number of places, including Apple Podcasts. And stream us on Spotify, Apple or Amazon Music, Audible, as well as any podcasting service. If you love one of the old school podcasting apps that you've been using for years, I know I'm like that as well. We should be on any of those services. If you could subscribe, rate, and review us on any of those platforms that allow for that, we would appreciate that. It always helps out the show to be discovered. And then if you want to join live, like a couple people here in the chat so far, you can do that here at youtube.com/darktowerpalaver. Not only can you join live for the live streams every 2 weeks, or every fortnight, as I like to say, because old-timey language is awesome, and I think Dark Tower reflects that as well. Things like palaver, for instance, part of the title of the show, that's an old-timey word. But youtube.com/darktowerpalaver. Not only can you join us live, but also all of the stuff ever since we've started doing stuff on YouTube, which has been years now. You can go back and find all of the episodes in our archive. So if you can't join live, but you do still want to see the slideshow, all that kind of stuff, you can do that still on the YouTube side. As well as I said, like I mentioned, there's also this little shorts. Last year's March Insanity, I did a weekly 10-15 minute video where I jumped on at the end of each round and recapped what happened, as well as looked ahead at the next rounds and that kind of thing, because again, with only doing 2 episodes a month, that doesn't give us a lot of time to talk March Insanity stuff. So there'll be little short things like that as well over here on the YouTube channel. And then if you want to find then on the YouTube as well, of course, the algorithm gods will destroy us if we don't say like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications. If there's ever any changes, such as I get sick or something and we got to move an episode a week forward or whatever, or back, whatever it might might be, the notification bells is the best way to let you know, as well as I usually try to post stuff on our social media, as well as the YouTube text thing that allows you to post text things. If I do have to move an episode, I'll try to make sure it's on blast out there. But your notifications will also alert you as well. Then if you want to find the show notes, you can do that at darktowerpalaver.com. That is the spoke that is the hub at the center of all the spokes of the wheel of Dark Tower Palaver, is darktowerpalaver.com. There's links for everything. All of our stuff pretty much is linked there, as well as you can find the show notes, which there is no show notes for the book clubs, because what would there be for that? We're just talking about the actual text. But we do also have the questions for new listeners. If you are a new listener, we consider you part of our extended quartet, and we welcome you. And as part of what we've seen now with Susanna and Eddie and Jake, anytime someone joins the quartet new, usually what they do is they sit around the campfire and they tell their story. Well, over the years we have found some questions that are good primers for those kind of conversations, and those can be found over at darktowerpalaver.com. If you'd like to send a welcome email to introduce yourself to the extended quartet, there are questions there if you want to answer one of them, if you want to answer all of them. If you don't want to answer any of them and just email your own thing, that is totally fine as well. But for people that may be nervous and not exactly sure what to say in an email, those questions are a good way to prod you along to maybe make an email a little bit easier. So you can find that over there as well. And then if you want to support the show, you can do that at patreon.com/darktowerpalaver. With that, you get access to the 24/7 Patreon. Patreon. You get access to our Discord server, where Peter, he is very, very busy with the new job, but he is still in there chatting away as much as he possibly can. So he's there, I'm there. You can always send stuff in. We're always talking about random Stephen King things, random Dark Tower things, random whatever things. You have access to that, as well as monthly hangouts. A monthly hangout. We did one last month, and this month I'll be doing one with the next set of episodes in 2 weeks. So that's all of that stuff. Then if you want to contact the show, for instance, if you want to send in your nominations, you can do that at show@darktowerpalaver.com. That is the email address. Again, show@darktowerpalaver.com. Send your emails that direction. You can also find us on facebook.com/darktowerpalaver. Maybe if you're on the Facebook side and you see the post for this episode, drop a comment with your nominations if you want, as well as you can find us on Twitter at Dark Tower Pod. Again, Dark Tower POD. Because at the time we set this up 8 years ago, Dark Tower Palaver was too long for Twitter's I guess how they let you set up names. It was like 2 characters short. So Dark Tower Pod is our Twitter handle. Again, we have posts for these episodes if you want to respond to it, or I have a pinned tweet talking about the March Insanity upcoming thing. Respond to that. Give me your nominations if you want to there, as well as Instagram. We're on Instagram. Find us at Dark Tower Palaver. And then we are also, I finally added it to the list, we are on Blue Sky, the alternate to Twitter, which is still growing. It is at darktowerpalaver.bsky.social. Unfortunately, that's a little clunky, but that is unfortunately the way that they run things over at Blue Sky. But we are on there as well. So that is all the information. Yeah, indeed. Baraki mentioned no spoilers in the chat, but I will say that, I don't know, I guess I can't answer it even vaguely, because if someone else is on the YouTube side, they would potentially be seeing the chat as well if they haven't finished the series. But yes, that is a very good question. Sorry I cannot address that on a book club. Now, at the spoiler section, if I do not forget, I can come back and mention the answer to that. But for now, let's go ahead and jump on in. I cover the March Insanity, cover the intro stuff. So let's go ahead and get on into the book club itself. So where we left off, we are currently in the 4th book of the Dark Tower series called Wizard and Glass. The 4th book is divided up into parts. We are currently in part 2, which is titled Susan. Part 1 was the end of the Blaine, the mono stuff. So part 2 is titled Susan. If I remember right, there's like something like 20 subchapters or it's 20 or God, I can't remember now. No, I think it's 10 chapters, something like that. So there's a lot in this part, but we are about maybe close to halfway through this second part. We are on currently chapter 5, which is titled Welcome to Town. We left off with subchapter, we're going to start off with subchapter 6. Subchapter 5 last time was the boys arriving to the welcome party at Mayor's house. They met Coral Thorin and Olive Thorin outside, and they were quite, I don't know, especially Roland really liked Olive as they met her out there, and they were she was very giggly to the boys and stuff. Coral, not so much. She was a little bit more of a prickly pear. But that is where we left off, is them talking outside of the party. So now we're getting to subchapter 6, which is where the party begins. Also, I guess we'll see how this all pans out, but I will warn, I ended up cutting this a little bit shorter than what I normally would do. I usually try to find a percentage of the Kindle version that generally gives me the right amount of text, and when it comes to the discussion and stuff, to fill out the episode. I cut it a tiny bit shy from what I would normally do percentage-wise, because I didn't want to half start the next section, which we'll talk about maybe at the end in the spoiler section, but we'll see how the conversation goes. You never know. Sometimes even my prep, we end up going a little bit longer than needed, than I anticipated. So we'll see, but if this does end up a tiny bit short, it is intentional, based on blocking things out the way I think they should probably fall. So let's jump on in here. Recapping the first chunk of chapter 6 here, Roland nodded to the bored cloak and coat collector, who happened to be Deputy Dave, who was because it was his job here is very slow, because it was warm enough, even with the sea breeze, that most people there were not wearing an outer layer for him to gather. The boys were approached by Sheriff Avery and an elderly man as gaunt as old Dr. Death in a cartoon. I do believe that might be King talking to us there, because I don't think they have cartoons in this world. But I think it gives us the impression that this is a tall, skinny, gaunt person. Beyond the approaching men was a set of double doors, through which the whole room was full of people with crystal punch cups in their hands and taking bits of food from circulating trays. I think most of us in our world have been at certain parties that seem very similar to that. Maybe we didn't have crystal punch cups, but we had cups of some kind, and little people going around serving little tiny finger foods on trays. That sounds very familiar. Or we've seen shows that have that kind of thing. Roland had just had time to throw Cuthbert a narrow-eyed glance, which told him, and then it says it's kind of in parentheses because it's basically his non-verbal communication, basically telling him everything, every name, every face, every nuance, especially those. Cuthbert raised an eyebrow to acknowledge Roland's unspoken message. Then Roland was pulled willy-nilly into the evening, his first real evening of service as a working gunslinger, and he had rarely worked harder. Old Dr. Death turned out to be Kimba Reimer, Thorin's Chancellor and Minister of Inventory. The latter title Roland suspected had been invented for their special visit. Reimer was at least 5 inches taller than Roland, who even at his age was considered tall in Gilead. His skin was pale, not unhealthily, but pale nonetheless. And on top of his head was bald jets of gray hair jutting out from the sides, or his head was bald on top with jutting jets of gray hair off of the sides. I always consider that, that bald on top, I always consider that the Picard hair, is how I've always talked about that. I'm sure there's any number of celebrities or real people that we know that have hair like that, but I've always thought of it as the Picard since I was a wee lad, although puffier on the side isn't necessarily Picard, but bald on top is definitely Jean-Luc Picard from Star Trek. After introductions were made, he welcomed them to Magus, to Hambry, and to Seafront, their, quote, humble mayor's house. To which Roland replies, if this is humble, he wonders what palaces they might build. It was more of a pleasantry than a witticism, as he left the wit to Bert. But Reimer and Avery laughed heartily at the comment. After he felt they had expressed enough amusement, or after he felt they probably thought they had expressed enough amusement at his comment, Reimer told them to come along. The mayor was waiting patiently for them. So stopping here for some notes, they don't clock it here, but we as readers know something is afoot with the movers and shakers of this town. We've already seen a little bit of it when we're away from Roland. So we know there's some shenanigans involved here, especially last episode we had Jonas talking. It does sound like at least Jonas and his group are tied in with John Farson. And we don't fully know the extent of how this ties into the town, but we do feel that there is something is not above board in this town, all in all. Going on, and I thought that having a deputy as a coat taker aroused some suspicion to me, because if you're a big enough town to warrant deputies and not just a single sheriff, you should probably have enough people to man the coat taker role that wasn't a law enforcement person, especially because also because in a town this small that's this small that only needs a couple of people, it's probably Avery and like a handful of deputies. That also tells you it's also a small enough town that they probably kind of know who's who, and there's probably not a huge crime rate. So this just feels very weird to have a law enforcement officer at the door. It also feels like it could be somewhat strategic, where you do have someone that is a little bit more of a trained fighter at the front door. Again, we don't know enough about this area, if there's like raiders or attackers or something that might come that they would be defending against. But it just struck me as very weird that it wasn't just like a farmer's wife or just I don't know, a bartender, just someone a little bit like less than a law enforcement officer that's playing coat taker. It just felt very weird to me. Made me raise my eyebrows a bit. And then Baraki says, I always thought this scene was fun to read. So much going on between the lines. Indeed. Yeah, a lot of subtext here for sure. And it's kind of fun because we are a little bit more in the know. I mean, there's always a different thing with different authors where they'll either let the audience in on the secrets entirely, or they'll let them into the secrets a little bit, or sometimes not at all. And sometimes the characters are even ahead of the reader. King is obviously playing that middle road here. We know a little bit more than Roland and his Tet that there is something afoot here. Of course, there's some suspicion on their side, but we have actually seen some confirmation of some stuff, but we're still kind of in the dark. We don't fully know what's going on, but we do know enough that, just like Baraki saying there, we know that there's some stuff going on between the lines here. There's some disingenuous, like laughter. There's just, I don't know. There's some, I would consider it like poker faces. We've heard castles mentioned in the last episode where, Jonas said that he believes they're playing castles, and then when Roland, one of the last things we actually saw in the last episode, right before they went in, was him basically saying, let the games begin. And it said internally, he's like, he didn't know what game he was talking about. He didn't think that it was castles yet. But that was just the thought that kind of came to him. So I guess in their parlance, it would be castles, which again, I think I said last episode, I assume that's something like chess. That just, I don't know why. I even mean the first time reading, before I even knew any more context, it just felt like something that would be chess. But I also think poker face, where it's like, you're acting a certain way with a certain hand. You want the other players to think something when something else entirely is the truth. I feel like that's a lot what's going on. What's going on with all these characters here. There's a lot of hidden things both on the side of our quartet as well as these town folk. Next up, my next note here, the nonverbal shorthand is impressive. Again, Roland is just barely a gunslinger, and his friends are still probably a couple years away from their trial to being full gunslingers. But I think this speaks very heavily to their closeness. Whether it be their closeness growing up or being educated through court, whatever. There's a bond that has grown between them, because I think like the nonverbal shorthand is something that you might have with a husband or a wife, or a very, very good friend, a longtime best friend, something like that. But I don't think that you're gonna like work with someone for a couple months and then have like a nonverbal shorthand, generally speaking. So I think this does kind of speak to the fact that, again, if we do have to remember that Roland and his quartet here are about the age of 14. So not only does that show that there is kind of a deep-rooted friendship and trust here, but also they're a little bit beyond their years in terms of whatever. Because I would say even kids that met in kindergarten, which would put you at like 5 or 6 years old, and then you move them up to 14 if they were friends the entire time. Even then, I don't know if I'd give kids that age credit to have nonverbal shorthand as much, just because, I mean, when you're kids, do you really need it as much? So I think it does speak a lot to these characters here. Hi, Cody, welcome. Glad to have you here. And then Baraki also says, castles, I always pictured something between chess and Risk. Yeah, exactly. And I think for me, maybe it was even just the name castles. Like, again, there's obviously the pieces on the chessboard that kind of look like castles, and like there's just the context of it. It felt like strategic was kind of implied in the way that so far these characters have used the term castles, and I just assume Risk, but yeah, or I mean chess, but yeah, you're right. Adding Risk in as well. Risk is obviously a very strategic game. Although I mean, I guess chess games can last a long time, but I don't know if they last 4 to 6 hours like Risk games. I love the game Risk, but it is not as devastating of losing friends and family as maybe Monopoly, but I think it gets pretty damn close. My next note here, the look is not exactly the same. Especially the entirely bald top head of Reimer, but who I've always pictured this guy as is actually the tall man from the horror movie series Phantasm. If you've ever seen that series, you'll know exactly who I'm talking about. That guy definitely, he's kind of got a receding hairline, but he's not like completely bald on top, but he's a very tall, gaunt, older guy. So pretty much since day one, and I grew up on horror movies, since day one of reading this, some characters, it's funny to me, like immediately I'll get like another character from a movie or a video game or a show that attaches to these characters, and other times they just don't. I think I mentioned it before. Sometimes these characters are just shadows to me, like they're a shape that I can like picture in my head, but I just don't put any detail to them, and other ones I'm just like immediately like, yep, there's someone. And for me, Reimer, just the way that they explained him here, I always picture the tall man from Phantasm, the horror movie series. So yeah, if you're a fan of that, if not, you can always Google it and kind of get an idea of what I'm talking about. If you don't have him, I guess I could have got a picture for the slideshow here, but I didn't think about it. So hamming it up, laughing at Roland's comment is also suspicious. We have seen that there's plenty for them to be disingenuous about. But I just feel like in general, when people are very kind of over exaggerated with things, that's a very telltale sign that something's afoot, right? Like bad poker players, they'll get very animated. Like they may be somebody that's a little bit more like on the level and whatever. They don't really like, their needles don't run high or low. They just kind of run in that middle area. And then suddenly when they know they're lying in like a poker thing, a lot of times a tell will be like, you know, suddenly their needles jumping up higher because they're way more, you know, exuberant and stuff. So something like this where they start laughing over the top for a comment that really wasn't meant to be funny definitely makes me and I get I'm an adult that's, you know, over, you know, I guess over double the age of Roland. That hurts here when he's 14. I've obviously have way more experience, as well as I've, you know, watched a lot of movies. I know he's been trained, but it's like I've, you know, just in general, you watch a lot of movies, TV shows, as well as experience life. You get to know these things. I don't necessarily hold it against Roland and his quartet here at the age of 14 for not necessarily immediately locking on to this over the top like acting from these people. But I know that certainly it's something that I kind of lock in on. Baraki says, Reimer, I pictured Brad Dourif, Worm Tongue from Lord of the Rings. Yes, as well as he is Chucky from the Child's Play series. He voiced him throughout, but also played him in the first scene of the first movie. And then, yeah, he's a legend, man. He also was in, was Exorcist 3? I think it was one of the Exorcist movies, the one where they bring the young priest back from the first one. They have Brad Dourif in there, which is pretty awesome. He's a horror legend for sure. But yeah, of course, I think more people would probably be familiar with him from Lord of the Rings, certainly. But yeah, he's awesome. He's a great actor. And then going on, the rest of this subchapter here, a timid voice agreed with Reimer's statement about the mayor's waiting. It was Olive Thorin, who is still behind the boys now, because again, they've moved up the stairs, they've engaged with Olive, and they've moved in, and then it ran into Reimer and Avery, and then behind them obviously would still be Olive. But then it does say, though, that Coral, on the other hand, has disappeared, so it is just Olive here. She is smiling pleasantly and told them that Hart is very eager to meet them, and offered Kimba to take the boys to him, but he cries her off, saying that she has enough other guests to attend to, and she agrees and curtsied to Roland and his Tet a final time. And as she did this, Roland saw that while she smiled warmly, he could see that she was unhappy about something, desperately so. He even thought Kimba smiled a toothy smile and asked them to follow, and he led them past the grinning sheriff and into the reception hall. So my notes here, we know why she's unhappy, though Roland doesn't, at least not yet. And then Baraki in the chat, my heart breaks for Olive every time I read this part. I agree with you totally, man. I feel for her so much, and we're gonna get more of it as we move into this through this episode. But I agree with you 100%. I feel very, very bad for her indeed. And then my next note here, the smiling of Kimba and Avery just seems so phony to me. I know King isn't necessarily overtly calling it out that they're phony smiles or anything, but I just think we have enough context clues about, you know, them in general that I just feel like when they talk about toothy smiles, I think that there's like a phoniness that goes along with that. At least that I'm, again, I know it's between the lines and maybe I'm inserting it needlessly, but in my mind, they're very, very phony grins. Although I guess if you actually, you know, when you put this on film, you can't go too phony or it ends up making Roland in the Tet look stupid. So maybe I'm even making it more obvious in my head than it actually should be. Because obviously, yeah, it can't be like, you know, shifty-eyed grinning or big toothy grin where they look like cartoon villains or anything. Can't go that far. But I don't know. It's just something about this that feels icky. And again, we know we've been let in on a bit. There is some stuff afoot here. We know that Eldred Jonas in the last episode, he talked about working for Farson. We know from the Rhea stuff that Farson, that's Farson's glass ball that Jonas delivered to her. So we know that Farson's involved with these people, but we don't necessarily know the full extent of it quite yet. So let's go on over to subchapter 7, moving on along here. So Roland was hardly overwhelmed by the reception hall. It said, and again, I'm just recapping here. He had, of course, been in the Great Hall of Gilead, the hall of his grandfathers. He had peered down on the great annual party held there called Dance of Easterling, which marked the end of White Earth and the start of sowing. I think somewhere someone has actually gone through, I'm pausing real quick, and actually outlined like what each of these like things are, like what is sowing, what is White Earth, all these kind of things, and broken it out to roughly what it means for our like our seasons and calendars and stuff. But I don't have that offhand. I need to look into that more. I can't remember if it's Robin Firth or if it's Bev Vincent. One of those two books I know has like a chart that shows you that whole thing, but I need to lock that down in my mind more, because a lot of times I just kind of like outside of the more obvious ones, I kind of just let them blow by me, and I don't really like put too much thought into like what they are equivalent to our world. Like, you know, we obviously nowadays have broken it down to 4 seasons. Ours isn't as broken out as theirs is, but certainly it kind of equates to like, you know, reaping equates to like kind of your harvest and Thanksgiving and that kind of thing here in America. But yeah, there's a couple obvious ones, but outside of that, don't quite know exactly where these line without pulling up some reference on it here, because King never really overtly spells it out. I think that whether it's Robin Firth or Bev Vincent that actually figured that out, I think they did have to go and take a bunch of clues from across the entire series of books and put it all together to figure out where they all land. And if it was Robin, she may have actually even asked Stephen King, you know, himself how it all lines out. So then it goes on and says Gilead had 5 chandeliers, not just one, and it had electric bulbs instead of oil lamps. So I think the fact that it's not overtly saying that, you know, but I think what it's implying here is that the one here in Magus, it is only one chandelier and it is oil lamps. I like the way King writes it, though. It's more talking about Gilead and then like passively referring to Magus, which is kind of cool. The partygoers of Gilead had been rich young men and women who had never done a hard day's work in their lives, a fact that John Farson pointed out at every opportunity, and they were always dressed richer than these folks. The music had always been fuller, and the company of older and nobler lines grew closer as they stretched back to Arthur Eld. Yet there was plenty of life here. There was a robustness here that Gilead hadn't had in a long time. The texture here was the kind of thing that you never missed out. You never missed it when it was gone, because it slipped away so quietly and painlessly, like the blood like blood from a cut vein in a warm bathtub. The room was circular, the walls lined with poor paintings of past mayors. On a raised platform, 4 guitarists with sombreros played what sounded like a waltz with pepper on it. In the center of the room, a table held punch bowls, one grand and the other smaller, more plain. The man serving from the two was another of Avery's deputies. Despite what Avery told them the day before, there were actually some men here with sashes. We covered that in the last episode. They were worried about what they needed to wear, and I believe the mayor said that no one would be wearing sashes, but it turns out, indeed, there are some people wearing sashes, but it said, but for every one of these men, there was probably 3 more that were only wearing coats that Roland associated with farmers going to church, as well as some younger folks who were not wearing jackets at all. Just like nice shirts. Roland and company did not feel particularly underdressed. So going on into my notes here, I love this dive into Roland's mind to compare this to Gilead. It totally works because that is what any of us would do. I think when you go to a place, you compare it to something that you've seen or known. I mean, whether it be for us, whether it be like going to a church or something for a wedding. If you've been to a church more regularly or before, or whatever, you kind of compare it to what you've been to before. I mean, you could see it for like concert events. You can see it for, even restaurants. Just there's certain things, if you're familiar with certain places and you go to somewhere that's new but similar, you kind of compare to what you've known before. So this feels very real to me. This feels like what I would be doing if I lived in a time that had great halls and celebrations like this. I'd probably be comparing it to the one that I was familiar with. And in Roland's case here, obviously he's used to one that's far more big and grand and opulent, and this is a little bit more humble and down to earth. My next note, it also does well to ground us in the fact that we are a long way from Gilead. This is grand for them, but a far cry from what these boys grew up around. I love the whole idea, though. My next note, I love the whole idea about that there is a robustness here that Gilead lost long ago. Feels like a part of the world moving on. It's kind of a social rot that is so minute and slow that it goes without notice. I feel like all of us have seen these things like this in our real lives. It could be a workplace, it could be a church or social club, it could even be like a restaurant. It could be any kind of thing where like it once had its glory days, but then slowly over time those glory days went further and further behind it, and before you know it, like maybe one day someone walks in and says something and it's like a lightning bolt where you're just like, holy shit, like how much it's changed in the last 8 years. I didn't realize it. Like that is just so real to me. I've seen it in different settings where suddenly you'll wake up one day and realize it's something that you're involved with. I mean, I've even seen it with jobs and stuff too, where it was a certain way and then suddenly it's not, and you don't see it happen because it happens so slow. You don't really notice it. I guess it's also like it could be even like it's not the exact same, but it's like with kids. If you have kids like nephews or nieces that you don't see very often, you kind of have them stuck in a certain size, then you see them again and it's 5 or 6 years later and suddenly they're like double the size, and you're just like, holy shit, I still thought, I mean, I knew, really in your head that they've aged, but in your mind doesn't like equate for their growth. Or there's like people that will like lose weight or get taller, but people that see them every day don't notice it, and it's only the people that see them rarely that notice it, because when you're around them all the time, you just don't notice it because it's just minuscule changes over a long period of time. You just don't notice it. So I really like that. That is a cool thing, and it speaks to not only Gilead and the world moving on with Gilead, but whatever it is that they've been losing in Gilead, they still have it here in Magus, which is kind of cool, because for all the opulence and grandeur that Gilead has, it seems like the things that's really important, like this, whatever this robustness and this liveliness is, this little tiny humble Magus still has it where Gilead doesn't. So it's kind of a cool dichotomy there to see the two things compared. My next note, also the gauging of everyone's dress is awesome. It gives us an idea of the diversity of this place, of a place like this, but at the same time, it feels very relatable. I think most of us have been invited to a wedding or a funeral or a social gathering where the dress expectations were nebulous and you were very nervous about, how you had to dress. I mean, I've been to weddings like that where they're like, oh, we're not really going formal, so don't dress, whatever. And so suddenly it's like when they break that norm of what you should be wearing at a wedding. I've also been to funerals that way, where it's just like it's kind of communicated that like, hey, this isn't a normal funeral, don't dress like a funeral. And it's like then it puts you in a spot where you're like, well how the fuck do I dress when I when the social norm is thrown out? You're like, oh god, am I going to underdress, am I going to overdress? And then when you actually arrive, if you're anything like me, and at least whether it's just me overthinking everything, but then I go and I end up going and scoping everybody out to figure out, am I overdressed, am I underdressed, whatever. So to see Roland and his Tet basically doing the same thing, I feel very seen with this, because I have been there. Like I said, I've had both funerals, I've had weddings, I've even had church things where I've been invited for various events, to where I get invited to a church and I'm told like that the dress isn't what you would expect, and then it puts you in a weird spot where you're like, well, I don't know how the fuck to dress then. So I love that. That makes me happy that Roland is having the same thoughts as I am, and I've had most of my life. So then going on to the next section of this subchapter here, one person stood out, and of course it was Susan Delgado, almost too beautiful to look at in her blue silk dress with a high waist and a square cut bodice that showed off her cleavage, and around her neck a sapphire pendant that made Olive's earrings look like paste. She stood near a man finely dressed with a sash of the barony's color, and Roland supposed that was Mayor Thorin. Though Roland barely saw him and he could not take his eyes off Susan, her hair was mostly down and it was nearly to her waist. He wanted her, suddenly and completely, with the desperation that felt like an illness. Everything that he was and had come for had become second to her. She turned and saw him, and her eyes widened the tiniest bit and her lips parted a little. The man standing next to Thorin was tall and skinny with long white hair that went down to his jacket. Then that man said something, and Susan turned, re-engaged the conversation, and laughed along with the entire group. The man with the white hair smiled but did not laugh. Roland hoped his face did not give away how hard his heart was pounding. Reimer grasped Roland's arm, and he smelled perfumes and oils. And for no reason at all, he suddenly thought that he was dying. Of course, talking, in the metaphorical sense there. We're not worried about Roland actually dying here. But an internal voice told him to get a hold of himself. It doesn't really say whether this is his father or Court or whoever, but it is the traditional italicized internal monologue that speaks directly to him. We've seen that pretty much since the beginning of this series. He did, but it felt like he would get lost again when she looked at him again. It had been too dark the first time meeting to see her eyes, but now he did. It mentions that she has gray eyes. He thought he didn't know how lucky he was at the time to receive that kiss. Reimer introduced them to Thorin, and Thorin's face brightened. He was shorter than his chancellor, but just as thin. Thorin, it ends up saying that basically it doesn't say the name of the animal, but it almost says like he reminds Roland of I would almost say like a flamingo. It mentions a bird that is very tall and lanky that, go and swoops out of the water, or stands and then, puts its bill through the water. Roland basically said it equates how Thorin's general shape looks to a bird like that. Very skinny with very long eyes, or long legs. Thorin gives them a warm greeting, and Roland took his hand and felt the man's knuckles crack as they shook, but the man did not respond in any way, as though it was painful. Roland introduced himself as Will Dearborn, followed by Cuthbert as Arthur Heath, and last Alan as Richard Stockworth. Each of the boys bowed, and Thorin's smile widened with each bow. Reimer smiled, but it looked unnatural for him. It just didn't fit him. And the white-haired man dished some punch for some of the ladies, including one that we know that Roland doesn't, though. One of the ladies that he is closest to at this party. We've already heard him say in the last book club, he talked about smoozing up to one of the lonely women, and he actually mentions Cordelia Delgado. He mentioned her specifically. So we're in Roland's mind, so he doesn't know, but of course we, as readers, assume that's probably who it is. And then Roland was aware that all 50 or so people in the hall were looking at them now, but he felt one more than any other, of course, but he did not dare to look in her direction. Let's see. And then Baraki says every young man reading this would be able to identify with this part on a deep level, a way I'm not sure women, girls / girls could. Yeah, indeed. This is all very very, very real and relatable. Most of it when we're a lot younger. I think that in general, I'm not going to say that romanticism dies in people, but it certainly fades over time. And even the most romantic of people is probably nowhere near as romantic in their 30s as they were in their teens. So yeah, I definitely agree, Baraki, on that. So my notes for this section, now Roland gets a full look at Susan, no longer in darkness, and he has swept up more than he was on the road. It's hard to track that, for me at least, because when reading, we imagine a person, and a lot of times we'll be described that person by the author. But sometimes it's so easy to kind of forget about the darkness and the fact that they'd be a little more than shadows to each other. And also, I tend to, like, in my mind, I'm not going to darken them out to complete shadows. For me, I always just imagine that blue lighting that all the movies back in our childhoods used to always used to convey darkness. That's what I always picture. So with that, I'm able to see, like, maybe not the exact eye color, but it's like you see like the shape of their face and most of the details, like, of them, maybe even like the type of clothing they're wearing. Because again, growing up on movies from like the 60s, 70s, and 80s, there was always that ubiquitous blue light that they used to convey, oh, it's pitch black, but we obviously can't shoot on film if it's too dark, so we use blue lighting or whatever. So that's how I always picture it in my head. That's just how I've been conditioned. So most of the details are there, but yeah, in reality, there would be much less. So much so that that he's probably now only truly seeing her for the first time, and vice versa. She's now seeing him a lot more truly than they would have been seeing in the starlight on the road there. The white-haired man is Jonas, of course. It is not, because again, we're in Roland's head right now, so he does not know that. But we know only one person so far that we've seen that has long gray hair. And the fact that he's not smiling, or he's smiling, but he's not laughing at jokes, kind of follows with the hard case nature that we've already met with Jonas in the last subchapter. Or not the last subchapter, but the last book club episode 2 subchapters ago. So it is so strange to imagine him in this kind of setting. It makes sense that he would need to be capable of doing this, but so far we've only really seen him as a hard case, both meeting with Rhea, we kind of saw that in flashback, and then the stuff at the Traveler's Rest in the couple subchapters ago. We've kind of seen him as just this hard-edged, badass, outlaw type person. So to see him in kind of this more formal setting with like the who's who of this town just feels wrong. It doesn't feel like he belongs there. But of course, like, for a man to do the job that he probably has to do, he has to be able to actually like hobnob with people like this. So I totally see it and understand that he would have that ability, but it is still very strange to see him placed in this setting of I guess what I put here in my note is among polite company. It feels very alien. Now it seems that they've been introduced to the main movers and shakers, Reimer, Avery, and Thorin. There are certainly other heavyweights in the town, but these are probably the top dogs in terms of public service. I mean, we know we've already been mentioned to. I think when the boys were talking to Avery, they talked about some big ranchers that are kind of big, powerful people in town, the rich and powerful ranchers that employ a bunch of people and stuff. I think Avery mentioned that they would probably be at this party as well. So you probably still have some people to meet that might be important, but Reimer, Avery, and Thorin seem like kind of that's your trifecta of power, as well as potentially Jonas, because it certainly seems like he's moved his way into that structure a little bit. Not that we fully know how yet, but he certainly, because what was it? Because Jonas in that last episode, Jonas said, like, where do we want them to stay? I want them to stay out was it the bar? I always forget, because there's the Bar K and then there's the two ranches, the one that burned down and the one that belongs to the rich rancher. The one that burned down, he says, I want them to stay out there. It's out of the way. It'll keep them where we need them or whatever. And he says, I'll tell Avery, and then Avery will tell, he says, I'll tell Reimer, and then Reimer will tell Avery, and then Avery will tell them. So it kind of gave you the sense that, like, Eldred was definitely holding some weight, and he was able to essentially manipulate some of the top level people in this town to get the our boys placed in a place that was his choosing. So we could definitely see that he's a power behind the throne a bit, but we don't fully know how that all works yet. I feel for the boys here. Most humans fear public speaking, and this is not particularly public speaking, but I think most of us would prefer, if we were in a setting like this, to never be the center of attention in a room where you've got, a bunch of people staring at you and looking at you. I think most of us would probably prefer that never to happen. And in fact, some of us might go to larger, events, whatever it might be, hoping to God that there's never a spot where all the attention is on us. Of course, unless it's like your own wedding or something that that's going to happen. But, you go to like a shindig or get together with 20, 30 something people, and the last thing you'd want to do is be the one that everyone there is looking at. So, going on here, Thorin asked if their trip was difficult or if they had any adventures or experienced perils. He said that he would like to hear all about their trip at the dinner, as they had so few visitors from the inner baronies anymore. He then asked if they encountered any patrols of Farson. Roland tells them no, and he addresses the mayor as he addresses him as Excellency, and Thorin actually cuts him off and says no to that. He says basically, my voters won't have it and I won't have it. He says Mayor Thorin will do fine. So I do love that. Just as a pause, I don't have a note on that below, but I do love that because the fact that he mentions the voters won't have it. Of course, being a person of a public figure, a voted elected official, he obviously has to be very conscious of what his voters think or don't think or like or don't like, because his political and professional life depend on those people staying happy. So he obviously shuts that down right quick here. Roland said that there were many strange things they saw, but no good men on their journey. That makes Reimer laugh at the phrase "good men." Of course, we know that John Farson's called the Good Man, so I wonder if they just haven't really heard the phrase turned to apply to the larger collective of Farson's men as good men. So it makes him laugh. Thorin says that they would hear all about it, but he wants to introduce them to those closest to him. He tells them they have met Reimer and introduces them to Eldred Jonas, the chief of his newly installed security staff. He says he doesn't think he needs it, but Avery is plenty, but Reimer insisted, and when Reimer insists, the mayor must bow, is his phrasing. Reimer agreed and bowed himself, and all but Jonas laughed. Jonas said, pleasure in his reedy voice, and he wished them long days upon the earth, and shook each of their hands, coming to Roland last. And Roland noticed the coffin tattoo on his hand. Roland mistakenly said long days and pleasant nights, which he did not realize his mistake until later, as this was a greeting more associated with Gilead than the rural place like Hemp Hill, where Will Dearborn was allegedly from. It was a small slip, but he was beginning to think that their margin for small mistakes might be a lot less than his father believed when he had sent them here. Let me pause real quick. Baraki said these boys are a bit more comfortable in that situation because of their training, and even being apprentice gunslingers would have put them in this attention, in the attention of the common folk, and that's definitely true for sure. I think that they would be a little bit more able to roll with it. I think they would still be uncomfortable, but I think they'd be able to more easily roll with the punches here than probably most of us would. Okay, going on here, the mayor next introduced Cordelia Delgado, who had been talking to Jonas. So as a pause here, we already assumed that one of the women that Eldred was kind of smoozing up to was probably Cordelia, and this now confirms it. Roland bowed and noticed the familial resemblance, but what looked generous and lovely on the face of Susan looked pinched and folded on the face of Cordelia. He guessed that it was not her mother. She seemed too young for that. Thorin then introduced Susan, and he sounded flustered, but Roland figured that she would have that effect on any man, even an old man like him. As she moved forward, Thorin's hand pressed the small of her back to coax her forward, and Roland felt a poisonous jealousy. So, and there's another one that, like Baraki said earlier, I think I think even girls and women probably have the same kind of jealousy, but I know that I think that's a human experience to have uber jealousy, and especially for someone that isn't yours, right? Like it isn't necessarily as common to have this with a wife, but maybe like someone that you fancy in your earlier life. And then you see someone hanging out with them, or you see someone whatever, and you just get that, that absolute fucking jealousy type thing. So I think that's a pretty universal thing there. Going on to my notes, I guess I am with the mayor. We did not really get their story of their journey to Magus, and they say they saw many strange things, but it makes me wonder what they saw. So I agree with the mayor. I want to hear all about it. Although King did not tell us. We pretty much saw them leave, and then we saw them arrive. So whatever journey happened on the road is one that we have not been privy to as readers. So the claim is that Thorin doesn't want the protection of the big coffin hunters, but Reimer insisted, and he bows to Reimer's wishes. I wonder how true that is, or if that is just him being modest. What I kind of picture with Reimer is, if you've ever watched The West Wing, and this is true to life as well, is, you've got the president, and then you've got the chief of staff, and the chief of staff, generally speaking, is kind of the one that runs the president, not in a way to like they actually like run things, but it's like the person that has like the president's schedule, and the one that'll tell the president like, hey, no, you need to like pull out of this conversation that you're in right now because you've got X, Y, and Z that need to happen in the next 10 so he's kind of the handler for the president, and I kind of feel like that's where I'm feeling Reimer is in this, what he is as a chancellor. That's kind of the chief of staff for the mayor, but I do wonder how much of this Reimer insists and I bow, how much of that is real, or how much of that is him just playing up modesty, whether that be for his voter base or whether that be to give a false sense of the power structure. Roland makes a mistake here, and it is one that Jonas would recognize. As we learned in the last episode, that Court's father gave Jonas the limp that he has when he failed his gunslinger trial and was sent west in disgrace. So he would recognize a Gilead phrase very well, because we don't necessarily know if like all gunslingers come from Gilead or not. We don't really know that, but we do know that Roland was in Gilead. Roland took his trial in the same, and the way it was conveyed to us is, not only was Jonas in that same area that Roland was, but that, Court's father was the one that gave him the limp, and the Court would recognize it because he saw the blow and all that kind of stuff. So even if gunslingers come from other places other than Gilead, we know from all the clues here that Jonas would have been a boy in Gilead, so he would very much recognize that turn of phrase. So yeah, very I don't want to say a big mistake, but that is a mistake for sure. Great way for King to ratchet up the tension here as well from the writing perspective. We know already that Jonas is dangerous, and we want him, and we as readers want him to know as little about the boys as possible. And this small slip may have taught him a lot. So I just remember as a reader just kind of tightening up with this, because once King in Roland, because it's not even in Roland's inner monologue yet, because Roland doesn't realize it yet. He doesn't realize it till later that he made this mistake. So Roland doesn't even know it's a mistake yet. But for King to clue us in that this was a mistake, I just remember as a reader the first time my stomach just tightening, because I'm like, no, this is the one guy you don't want to if you're bluffing a hand of poker, there's sometimes there's one person specifically you absolutely do not want to catch you in your bluff, and it seems that Jonas is the one so far that I am most scared of for our boys here. Also, Jonas is pulling off the plan that to smooth up to Cordelia that was outlined in our last episode. He outlined that to, oh God, I forget which one. I can never keep the other two coffin hunters straight. There was the one that the one is worried about the other, and that was the one he was talking to, and he told him they've got to go out and bury the oil or cover the oil tankers in shrubs and stuff. And he said that he'd be at the party, and he kind of got, the other coffin hunter got mad. Well, great, we're out busting our ass, and you're going to go to a party. He says, I'll be there to gather information. I'm going to smooth up to one of these lonely women, compliment them on perfume they don't have, and on and on and on. So, like, we saw that all outlined. Now we're actually seeing it playing out, although currently we're in the eyes of Roland, so he is not going to fully see what's going on. Next up, Roland figured Cordelia is not Susan's mom is interesting. To be honest, maybe it's just because of her personality, but I have always pictured her older. In fact, I don't think it was all that long ago that I mentioned that, Carla Gugano from the Mike Flanagan universe. I mean, she's done a lot of other stuff too, but we know her most as a Mike Flanagan regular. She played the mom in Haunting of Hill House. She played the ghostly person in the Fall of the House of Usher. I think I mentioned at one point that I've always pictured Cordelia as her pretty much ever since I saw her in Hill House. That's pretty much who I've pictured, and I think she's a bit older. She would have been old enough to have a daughter the age of Susan. So I think this is one of those things that I'm glad I'm doing the book club, because there's these small details that I just breeze over when I'm normally reading it, and I never would have actually picked it up without doing this nitty-gritty book club. That it does say that from Roland's perspective, she looks too young to have a daughter Susan's age, so that actually puts her as a little bit less of the old maid that I've always pictured her as being, I guess. So That's an interesting one. It says so past her prime, if you will, but if she appears too young to be Susan's mom, then she is not all that old. So yeah, very, very, very interesting. I'm glad. That's why I love doing these book clubs, because there's very small things like that it's just so easy to breeze over when you're just quickly reading or listening, and you're just like carrying the story through. But when you actually go through here and do this line by line analysis, there's these small things like that you catch, and it's like, holy shit! Suddenly Cordelia is younger than than I've always thought she was. Baraki says gunslingers are all from Gilead. Yes, that's why the boys' identities were all from other places other than Gilead. The gunslinger is based on family and hereditary. Yeah, I just and I know that we're also in a time that gunslingers are a lot less common than they used to be. I just don't know, like, is that because Gilead is smaller? I've just I don't know. I guess I wonder, like, way back maybe 1,000 years before where we're at now, is there like gunslingers coming from different areas? I don't know. I just I don't know. I think the reason that I would question it is because of all the times in the first number of books that Roland has not only said he's a gunslinger, but then when he says he's Roland of Gilead, I feel like those things are kind of separate. I feel like if all of them are 100% always from Gilead, does he really need to say he's Roland of Gilead, or couldn't he just say I'm Roland the gunslinger? I don't know. I just kind of, and of course we're at a time that, we've already had it mentioned in this book. We heard Stephen Deshane mention it. I don't remember if it was this book or if it was the flashback in book 1, where Stephen Deshane or someone mentions along the lines that there's a fraction of the gunslingers there used to be in the time beforehand. So we obviously know that. I kind of feel like it's almost like the Jedi in the prequel trilogy. Like, yes, there's thousands of them, and that's way more than we had in the original trilogy. But when you look at it, there is only thousands in an entire galaxy, and maybe in previous times there were tens or hundreds of thousands. Now there's only thousands. It just feels like that kind of thing where it's like slowly dwindling down in terms of population. So let's see, and then Mike popped in. It says Heil Mike. So Heil, I'm also it always makes me laugh because I remember years ago when they changed up the emojis, so the revolver emoji turned into like a little squirt gun. So every time someone throws that in there, it always makes me kind of laugh when it's a little tiny super soaker. Let's see, and then Baraki waves to Mike and Cody, and then David is here as well. Says gunslingers in different areas, gunslingers in different area codes. That stupid goddamn heart's in the way. I hate that thing. Goddamn YouTube, get that heart out of the way. Move it somewhere else on the screen, for God's sake. Yeah, so but yes, I do understand also, Baraki, what you're also saying is they're all obviously calling themselves as being from different areas, but I didn't necessarily interpret that as much as like hiding that like Roland's a gunslinger, as much as it was like detach them from, like, because again, I think they're so young, I don't think anyone would assume they're gunslingers. But if they found that, like, oh, this is this is Alan Johns, and this is Cuthbert Allgood, and this is Roland Deshane, and then they connect to their fathers, which are gunslingers, and they're all from Gilead, like, now suddenly that like raises it's like the president's kids in our world, right? Like, if they can make a young child of a president a little bit more anonymous, where people don't realize, oh shit, that's a president's kid type thing. I guess I've interpreted it that way, but maybe you're right. Maybe it could be the gunslingers are only from Gilead, but that's certainly the only thing that we've seen. Ultimately, up to this point, we haven't seen gunslingers from somewhere else, so I think that it's equally reasonable to say that they're probably all from Gilead. So David said there's an old blues song called In the Pines by Leadbelly that I've always listened to when I'm reading this book. Also another song called Witchy Red by Dr. John, which makes me think of The Witch. And then it says that was my attempt to work at parody on the ludicrous song, and it did not work out. Yeah, no, there's I don't know if we've ever had like a full on discussion in terms of like music for the Dark Tower. Not music that's in the Dark Tower, but music that always reminds you of Dark Tower, that isn't like I don't want to talk about Elton John or Hey Jude, or ones that actually are like seen in the book, but ones that kind of remind you of the Dark Tower. I know I've mentioned a song over the years, at least one that always reminds me of Dark Tower, but maybe that's a discussion to have on a round table at some point, is what music makes you think of Dark Tower. So then going on to the next bit of section here, Susan looked up and he was looking at her in the eye again. he had heard of drowning in a woman's eyes in poems and stories, but he always thought it ridiculous. He still thought it ridiculous, but he could also see it as entirely possible now for the first time. She sensed this, and fear and concern showed in her eyes. He remembered what he promised her, and that gave him the clarity, and he saw Cordelia looking at Susan with a mixture of curiosity and alarm. He bowed and said that he was pleased to meet her, but the casualness that he wanted and was attempting at sounded false to his own ears. She returned his greeting very briefly, almost briefly enough to be rude, before she moved to a land, and then to Cuthbert, who bowed and asked if he could sit at her feet because her beauty loosened his knees, and looking up at her from the cool tiles would put him right again. Everyone laughed at that, even Jonas. And Cordelia. Susan blushed and slapped the back of his hand, and for once Roland blessed his friend's foolery. Which I love that word, foolery. That's a fun one. Another man joined the group, a blocky man in a boxtail coat. His cheeks were red from windburn rather than drink. Roland figured he was a rancher. He tells them there will be plenty of girls for them to meet tonight, and that they would be drunk on perfume if they were not careful. But he wanted his chance at them first, and he introduced himself as Fran Langell, who owned the Rocking Bee. So the Rocking Bee, and then there's the Bar K. Yeah, there's like two things that have letters. There's Rocking Bee, which is the one that he owns, and there's the Bar K, is the one that burned down for the most part. There's only one building that was spared, which is where they're staying. And he's also the boss of the Horsemen's Association. He also said them staying at the Bar K was his idea, which obviously we know is a lie, because it was ultimately Jonas that came up with that, but it sounds like somehow that filtered through to where Fran Langell thinks that it was his idea, or he is covering for Jonas. All that's very suspicious. And he hoped it worked, and it was working for them. Alan said that it was perfect. He said it was dry and there was room for 20 people, so it was perfect. Roland says that Roland saw Thorin holding Susan's hand, and she seemed unaware of it, and he suddenly understood. He was her uncle or cousin, perhaps someone close. So that's this section. Let's see what I'm missing over here. David says, I got a playlist on Spotify that has nothing but songs that remind me of the different characters from this book or different books in general, as well as songs that are mentioned directly. That's awesome. David says, for being such a jerk, Cordelia Delgado is super perceptive as far as noticing that Roland and Susan have something going on. Yeah, indeed. Because this is really nothing. This is like a meaningful look, but it's like meaningful looks like that is not always the easiest thing to see. But yeah, Cordelia, she's locked in. She's sensing some shit here for sure. So my notes here, I love Roland is still Roland to actually drown in her eyes. I chuckled while reading that, because it's like, he'd always heard about drowning in a woman's eyes in poems and stories, but he thought it was ridiculous. And then like you expected to go, but now he understood. But no, King's like moves on and goes, but he still thought it was ridiculous, but now he could at least see that it was possible. So I love that. That's just Roland being Roland. That is like quintessential Roland in my mind. So I really do adore that line. It makes me laugh. And then my next note kind of goes along with what David said. The fact that Cordelia is curious and alarmed at this moment between Roland and Susan either tells us that she is paranoid about any little thing going wrong, or what is actually going on between these two characters is actually noticeable. And I don't know which to believe. I mean, because also I think most of us have also seen where there's a meaningful look exchange between like maybe coworkers, and then suddenly you realize like, oh shit, there's something going on here. There's something brewing between these two coworkers type thing, right? So I think we've all also seen those meaningful looks that are very, very obvious, and they may as well be tattooed on the foreheads of the people. So it's really hard to tell whether it's Cordelia being paranoid or whether it's, which we obviously know is a thing too, because the scene that we had with her grilling Susan when she came back from Rhea's disgusting hut, we kind of got the sense there that she is very paranoid about every little thing. So it maybe it's a little from column A, a little from column B, but she is perceiving something, and we know it's something real, but from her perspective, I don't know if it's just her suspecting or if she actually saw something here that's actually giving her some clues. Let's see. David said, Roland's obliviousness is hilarious to me in this scene. Yeah, indeed. Roland is, this is going to be fun to see Roland throughout this story as we move through these book clubs here this year and beyond. Rocky says Cordelia is very smart and very protective of Susan. Also, at first, I pictured Cordelia as ugly and very old, but gradually came to realize that she is just an older version of Susan, kind of. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's kind of what I kind of learned here, because, again, I always pictured her, she was someone in her, and I don't want to say old like it's a derisive thing, because, like, old's different to everyone, right? Like, I'm probably pretty old to someone like my niece that's, like, 15. But, like, I mean, I always picture that she's probably in her 50s or something, kind of in that realm where, like, she's, old enough that she's never going to get married and have kids. Like, we've kind of got that sense from her already that she already knows that she's beyond that thing that could happen in life, at least in this kind of culture where it's all about having kids and stuff. So like someone at her age would, whatever. That's how I've always perceived her. But with Roland now reading her and saying, wait, she's not even old enough to be Susan's mom, it's like, holy shit, she's a lot younger than I thought she was. So yeah, very interesting. Going on here, Cuthbert is the best, and as Roland realizes he broke the tension in the room, it's just awesome. Roland saying he's for once was thankful for Cuthbert's foolery, because again, all that tension maybe even like broke that suspicion away and got everyone's mind, or at least Cordelia's mind, off of whatever. But yeah, Cuthbert's the best. He's awesome. I cannot wait to see him on screen, and hopefully they get an actor that can really play up these laughs and perform Cuthbert in the way that we all imagine him to be. Going on, also Jonas actually laughing at Cuthbert shows that his superpower for humor is indeed real. As the rest of the funny things that we have seen throughout so far, we've only seen him smile, and he has never laughed. So now he's actually laughed for the first time that we've seen, and that just credit to Cuthbert to break a hard case like Eldred Jonas and make him laugh too. That's pretty awesome. And then my next note, we meet a big time rancher now, probably the one guy with some sway that we have not yet met. I said earlier, I think we've met most of the big that we've met the primary political movers in the town, but we did also know there was going to be some powerful folks that are a little bit more financially powerful, and it seems like this is probably one of them with Fran Lango. My last note before moving on here, Roland getting it so very wrong about Thorin and Susan just makes me laugh, man. It's like, I mean, you feel for him a little bit, but it's like, maybe it's just that lover's blindness where it's like he's in love with her, he knows that, so like his mind is maybe refusing to actually see things the way that they actually are. Instead, he's just creating any number of scenarios to explain what he's seeing, and it's like seeing him holding her hand and her kind of not being conscious of it, so it's something that she's not necessarily like uncomfortable with, is how I read that. And he takes, so he's like her cousin or uncle or something. So poor Roland. Let's see. David said, I'm an uncle and I don't oh god, that stupid heart, man. I am going to throw something in the chat, just so it moves up there. Okay, I'm an uncle and I don't act that way towards my niece at all. Yeah, exactly. I agree, as someone that also has a niece. So again, Roland is very clueless here. And same thing with cousins. I mean, I don't necessarily think I've ever held hands with a cousin before. So Roland, he's certainly got something in his mind that's blocking him from seeing the truth. Lango so moving on to the next bit of the recap here, Lango offered any help they might need, and he said he is strong for the affiliation, and they all are. He then said time for a drink, and went to get punch for the boys, and Roland quietly asked him if the smaller bowl was soft punch, and he responded that yes, indeed it was. And it says, and only then did he finally see them as actual people and not just as symbols of the affiliation. And only then did he also realize how young of people they were. Roland said that they would take some from that bowl. Everyone now was watching closely. He says that they have forgotten the face of their fathers, and it had some bearing on their posting here. And he did not need to go into all the details, and they probably didn't want him to anyway. But they had promised not to indulge in any spirits as penance. He realized midway through speaking that he was giving a speech, and everyone was watching and listening. Lengo breaks the silence that follows Roland's speech and says their fathers would be proud to hear him speak so. And no boy worth his salt didn't do a little hell raising at one time or another, but said that he would be proud. He would be proud of them in their father's place, as their fathers weren't here. Langle appeared to be ready to toast when Reimer tapped him on the shoulder and motioned him toward the mayor. Reimer eyed the band, and they stopped playing. And I don't think I put it. I don't think I put a note for this, but it's very interesting that a tap of the shoulder and a glance from Reimer stops Langle in his tracks, and also just a simple glance from Reimer and the band stops playing. So there's certainly some power dynamic with Reimer here, because he is. I kind of picture it like Tywin Lannister from Game of Thrones. Like, that's a dude that, one simple little glance will change the entire makeup of a room, and it's so far seeming like Reimer has a little bit of that ability as well. Thorin told everyone to welcome the boys who came on behalf of the affiliation and in service of order and peace. Susan retrieved her hand from what Roland thought was her uncle and joined everyone in clapping. Jonas did not clap. Thorin then introduced the three boys by name to the crowd. They gasped slightly at Arthur Heath of Gilead. The toast was then had, and everyone applauded. So, David says Frank Muller's Jonas is 100% perfect. That's all there is to it. Indeed. I mean, honestly, is there anything that Frank doesn't do perfectly? Like, let's be honest. He's something else. He was the best for sure. Yeah, and I will also say, I've mentioned it a number of times over the years, with Eldred Jonas, who I've always pictured is Ocelot Revolver from Metal Gear Solids. And I play like the early Metal Gear Solids, so like when I look at pictures of him, I'm like, God damn, he doesn't even look like a human. He's so like PS1 level graphics. But he kind of has like that wiry hair and, whatever. It just kind of has that cowboyish look. So that's who I've always pictured in the role of Eldred Jonas in my head, even though it's just a shitty PS1. And I'm sure he's been in later games where he actually has been animated in a better way. But I only know him from the PS1 version. But that's who I've always pictured for Jonas. But yeah, the reedy, wavery voice is obviously very distinctive. And Frank does a wonderful job performing that. So I love this moment because it is so public. It should be shameful, but in some reality, it really conveys their story to the whole town, because those not present are actually going to hear it from these people, right? Because this is just going to turn into that small town thing where it's like you tell 50 people, and by like the next day, like the entire town will know. It's impromptu, but it became a thing where everyone's focusing on it, and it gave Roland a chance to at least tip the hand for their cover story, right? Because their cover story is they're shamed. They did some shit that they're basically going to pay the price for, and that's why they're here to make good. And this kind of gives them the opportunity in a very public setting to float at least the start of that story, right? We have those kind of things here in our world, where you could just say a couple things and that people could then take from there and go on and get the entire context of what you're trying to convey to them. You could say one or two words and they know the rest of it, and this is that version of that for them. So this is kind of a cool way for them to basically spread their story to the whole town, as well as to avoid the strong drink, because obviously we know they're not shamed, but Roland wants them to be very keen and aware, and he wants them to avoid alcohol, so their story also helps cover to where they don't have to get pushed into a spot where they're drinking alcohol and getting a little bit loose, whether it be loose lips or whether it be negligent with noticing whatever. I don't know. There's any number of reasons for them not to drink. In our world, of course, they'd be too young to drink, but doesn't mean that this world's that much different. Although Langill's reaction to the fact that they are young makes me wonder if what the age level is for drinking in this world. So my next note, Lango almost leading the toast is funny. He got so carried away he forgot his place in this society. And Reimer, just kind of tapping him and giving him a look and moving his eyes towards the mayor made him realize, like, oh shit, nope, that's not my place. Let's let the mayor do the toast. And also, I love the reaction to Gilead. Again, we've seen it throughout this series. There's like a reaction to Gilead. Roland often gets like, well, Gilead's been gone forever. You can't be from Gilead, or oh my God, you're really from Gilead. Like there's kind of a special nature to Gilead, and it's interesting to see what that looks like now in this time, because we're now rewinding a long time before the world entirely moved on. There's obviously, we're now in a time where Roland's not the last gunslinger. There's thousands of them or hundreds of them, whatever there is. Gilead still exists, but it's kind of cool to see there is still kind of a like a reaction to Gilead even in these times. It's not like in our world like Atlantis or something. Well, whether Atlantis really existed, but I mean, like maybe it's like the Library of Alexandria, or something that hasn't existed for a long time. So it kind of gives you this idea of like, oh shit, I can't believe that. But it wasn't. But now this is showing us it's not just that even in the contemporary times that Gilead existed, it causes a reaction in people. So that tells us a lot about the world. Without going too deep into it, it kind of gives us a sense that even in this world, Gilead is awe-inspiring to folks. So, yeah, Baraki, a reverence for Gilead, indeed. Because I think that it made total sense when Roland's the last of the gunslingers and we're centuries removed from Gilead existing. That makes total sense. But the fact that we're seeing it here shows that it moves beyond just that, oh my God, the long-lost land that it's been gone forever. So, next up, maybe Jonas will think Roland's slip-up is something that he picked up from Arthur Heath. Because Arthur Heath is given to be from Gilead, we see that there's obviously a friendship between these. So I remember reading this the first time and wondering, well, because Arthur Heath is from Gilead, maybe Jonas just takes that Gilead phrase and assumes that he picked it up from his buddy Arthur Heath. And maybe because there is kind of a reverence for Gilead, maybe, like he wants to be like his buddy Arthur Heath from Gilead. So he starts to take some of the nomenclature so that he feels more like a Gilead kid. Or so I just remember like reasoning through that and hoping to God that maybe Jonas could like not be too suspicious, because again, he worries me. He's a scary character. So subchapter 8, moving on here, they moved into the dining hall that had 4 long tables that were so close that there was barely room to move between them. And I believe all of us have been in rooms like that whether it be in somebody's house and it's like a big family party and they got tables everywhere and you can hardly move, or I don't know if we've all been in rooms massive like that, but I think we've all been in situations where it's very uncomfortable because you can't there's almost no room. Cordelia pulled Susan back from Jonas and Thorin and asked furiously why Roland looked at her like that, and what she was thinking. Susan played dumb and said who and how, but Cordelia didn't buy it and basically said, don't play dumb with me, Miss Oh So Young and Pretty, and asked if she had seen that boy before. And Susan Susan said, now how could she have? Could she have? And she was hurting her by grasping her hand. And Cordelia said, better to hurt small now than large later. And told her to curb her impudence and flirtatious eyes. Susan claims ignorance again, but Cordelia says that she thinks she knows what she means, and if she noticed her cow's eyes, then half the room probably did as well. She then says that what's done is done, but child's games are over, and she's made a vow, signed a contract, papers have changed hands, and the old woman has been consulted, money has changed hands, she had made a promise, and Cordelia reminded her to think of what that would have meant to her father. She tells her to keep her eyes to herself and give that boy a wide berth if he comes around again. Susan promised, Cordelia smiled, and told her to take her arm because they are being looked at. So there is the follow-up to the suspicious looks from Cordelia. This is a shorter subchapter. So yeah, my notes here. So yeah, Cordelia saw something and she is not having any of it. Again, we don't fully know whether it's actually something that she saw and perceived or whether it's just her absolute paranoia. Because again, we've seen the paranoia on full display that night that Susan came back from Ria's. So next up, also weaponizing Susan's dead dad to keep her in line really makes me hate Cordelia. Just emotional manipulation is just the worst of it, and as well as because of that whole night after the Ria stuff we kind of got the sense from Susan that there was money changing hands and that Cordelia was getting all the money, and she claimed poverty, but she was one that was stashing away money all the time. So there's just a lot about this woman that I'm just not liking. There's a lot about her not to like. But now here we are seeing her manipulating. And I can't remember. I think then we get the sense that Susan's maybe a year older than Roland, so she's around 15 or so. She's still close to the same age, but either way, to be manipulating a child with the memory of their dead father and basically using that as a manipulation tool to keep them tied into a really shitty situation is a very insufferable thing to do, and Cordelia is the worst. I mean, of course, it's very early in the story, but I think there's plenty to hate about her and Rhea, so I don't think it's a spoiler to say that back in 2019, when we did the March Insanity, the first one we ever did was the most hated Dark Tower characters, and the final two of that vote bracket was Rhea of the Coos versus Cordelia Delgado. That was the final two, the two most hated characters in Dark Tower Palaver's fan vote. Rhea ended up winning, but the fact that Cordelia was there in that final, and the fact that we have two of the most hated characters in this book, I think we're going to have a lot to hate moving forward with this book here. And again, not that that's not a spoiler, because we've already seen plenty with these two characters to show every reason to hate both of these women as it is right now, let alone God knows what else we're going to fucking see from these horrible women. Let's see. And then Baraki says, she is so evil to invoke Susan's dead father to control Susan. I hate her worse than Rhea. Yeah, there's times that I kind of wonder if, like, I feel like if we had that fan vote daily, every single day, Cordelia versus Rhea for most hated, I really think that for me it would change day to day. And as we went through like this book club, for instance, I think depending on the episode, I think I can go, I would bounce back and forth. It would just be ping pong back and forth between which one I hated most. So yeah, very, very deplorable. So now moving over to subchapter 9. So Roland was seated near the head of the center table between Hash Renfrew, a rancher even bigger and blockier than Lengel, and Coral Thorin. Renfrew had been handy with the punch, and now that the soup was coming out, he proved to be adept with ale as well. He talked about the fishing trade that was not what it once was, the farming trade, which was good, and ranching, which he was most familiar with. He confirmed that bloodlines were clarifying. 3 out of 5 colts were threaded stock anymore, and the 4th could probably be put to work if not bred. Where only the 5th would be born with too many limbs or its guts on the outside, which that is a wonderful image for Mr. King to give us there, a baby creature born with its guts on the outside. But he admitted the birth rate in general was down. They were not as good as they once were. They were not as good as they had once been, but they could obviously be worse. So he's kind of in an interesting spot where he's not necessarily, he's kind of like, oh, the good old days, but it could very well be worse. So he's not like he's kind of middle ground, not full on pessimist, but not full on optimist either. Coral Thorin seemed disinterested, but Roland thought that she was listening a lot closer than she would make out. And he wondered if later on she would be reporting to her brother, the mayor, or perhaps it would be Reimer that everything that she heard would hear about. It was too early to say, but Roland wondered if Reimer was the real power here, along with Jonas. Roland asked how many horses he could report back to the affiliation, and Renfrew asked whether he meant total or tithe. Roland said total. Renfrew calculated, and Roland noticed Langell and Henry Wertner, the Barony's Stockliner exchange, the Barony's Stockliner exchange a quick glance, and they were listening as well. Roland realized Renfrew was drunk, but he was not as drunk as he was making out as being. He asked total, and not just what they would be expected to send in a pinch. Roland said yes. And he said Langell had 140 head. Croydon had nearly 100. Wertner had 40. And 60 or so along the drop, and he himself had a hard decade or so and had around 80 where he used to have around 200. Roland said that so there was about 420 head, and Renfrew laughed and said more than that, and explained that most fishermen had a horse or two of their own as well. Kind kind of gave an explanation that it's not just the ones that are the actual livestock, but everyone also owns horses here and there, so there would be more than that in the entire area. So my notes here: Renfrew is getting sauced but acting more drunk than he probably was. That is a bit suspicious. Makes me wonder if any of this is information the information that is real, or if it's all scripted. Because I obviously know we've seen it a number of times that people acting drunk or overcome with grief. I mean, people acting up into a certain extreme emotion, especially because I think there's generally some of these emotions that are, when they're so heavy, you end up being a little bit more loose with your lips. So for someone to pretend to be in one of those states, it always makes me wonder like how calculating they're really being. And then my next note: Bloodlines clarifying is a good reminder that the world has not fully moved on yet. In the full sense of what we've seen in the previous books, but whatever happened to this world initially happened way before these times, and mutants and radiation and horrible things is something that's been around for millennia or centuries at least, if not millennia of time. I think it's easy to remember or forget with the nomenclature constantly. Oh, the world moved on, and Roland saying I was in Gilead, then the world moved on, and Gilead doesn't exist anymore. I think it's maybe easy to accidentally conflate like the whatever destruction of this planet to like the falling of Gilead and that moving on. But it's a good reminder. No, even here in the times where Gilead still stands, there is still some horrible shit going on. And not only that, but it was so long ago that the clarifying nature of the bloodlines is now happening and almost complete. So it's actually been a very long time. I know this is a complete tangent, but I just read something recently where the scientists have found the wolves living in the Chernobyl exclusionary zone. They believe they have found these wolves are basically incapable of getting cancer. These wolves, obviously, they're living in one of the most irradiated places on the planet, and the fact that they might be resistant to cancer is kind of an insane thing. And I know that's nowhere near what this Roland's world is, but it's very, very crazy. I do think that there's a B-rate horror movie for irradiated wolves somewhere in there. So next up, Baraki says it speaks just to how well these boys are trained to have been able to pick up on all the subtle things and relationships between people here. Always impressive. Indeed. Yes, indeed. I do kind of imagine that we're still mostly in Roland's head here. So when he gave the signal to Cuthbert to catch every name, and everything, it seems like Cuthbert's kind of the real catcher of things. So I remember when reading this first time, hoping that we were going to get a scene down afterwards where they can kind of recap what they all learned and saw, kind of a what do you call it, like I'm trying to think of the right word, when they have a spy or something after their mission and they set them down and have them go through everything. There's a word for it, but I'm completely blanking right now. I'm watching The Masters of the Air right now, the new Spielberg and Hanks one, and they were doing that with the pilots after their missions, but they were actually calling it interrogations. And they're like, all right, all the pilots like line up over here for interrogation. I'm like, good God, you're calling it interrogations? Declassified stuck in my head. Debrief. Thank you, Baraki. Declassified was fucking sticking in my head. Debrief. Yes, debriefing. I was kind of hoping there'd be a debriefing scene with with the boys after this, so where we can kind of compare their cards and see who picked up what, and kind of maybe give us a better indication as readers. I remember hoping that, because again, there's a lot of suspicion here, but at the end of all this, I remember thinking to myself the first time reading, like, okay, how much do these kids actually pick up? Because I know more than they do, because King's given me glimpses into the rest of the thing. How much are they actually figuring out? Because I'm hoping it's plenty, especially with mistakes like accidentally tipping Roland's hand to Eldred Jonas potentially about Gilead. Disastrous stuff like that. It makes me hope that they caught something really big that can even it out a little bit. So my last note before moving on is the other ranchers listening in along with Coral. So Roland picking up the fact that Coral's listening, but also these other ranchers are listening, probably gives him a good idea that something is up, or that they're very suspicious about what they might be told. So I guess from my mind, there's either one of two ways. Everyone knows this is an act, and he's drinking, and he's probably maybe a little bit drunk, but he's acting more drunk. Do the rest of the people like Coral and these other ranchers, do they know he's acting, or do they truly think that he's actually that drunk and they're listening because they're worried about what he might tip, or are they just listening to make sure that they all get their own story caught up as well. So it's very interesting to see how it's all going to play out here. And I just remember kind of thinking there's different ways this can go. I wonder how it's going to go. So let's see. Jack showed up in the chat. Jack, hi, Tad. Hi, all in the chat. Been a while since I caught the show live. Indeed. Welcome. I was it's good to see you for sure. Yeah, I've been thinking recently about some of the regular. I mean, I know it's been the holiday season and stuff as well. So there's even some regulars that haven't been gone as long. They've been gone the last little bit because of the holidays and New Year and that stuff. But certainly good to see all the regulars. Even if you haven't been here in a while, it's good to see you back for sure. And apologies, Tad, I auto-corrected your name. No, I totally get it, man. The auto-corrects, it took me, I remember when I first got into the whole, every time I get a new keyboard, which isn't very often, but Android, and then when I got, the whole swipe keyboard, which ended up getting bought out by Microsoft, it's always a pain in the ass for me to get my name to program, because initially it always auto-corrects to 1D, so I totally get it. What always bothers me is in the real world, in work life, where people, are emailing me, so my name is right there in the email address, and they're typing on a keyboard and they type it wrong, because I'm like, dude, you're literally my name is in front of you, how do you get it wrong? But yeah, I get it when you're on a some kind of autocorrect keyboard. It happens, and every once in a great while mine goes a little bit HAL 9000 and autocorrects again incorrectly, even though it obviously knows my right name. So I get it, no worries. So moving on here, Renfrew nodded to Susan, saying that her dad used to keep the barony stables. Susan was sitting right by Thorin, while Olive was on the other end of the table by Cuthbert and a rancher they had not been introduced to. Which I just laughed that Cuthbert's just off in the distance. Again, I want to go sit by him, please. Let's go see what that looks like. He found her placement strange, especially with his wife so far away, and the fact that his wife was not heading her own table. He asked Renfrew how many total, and Renfrew asked that the answer would not come back to haunt him, would it? And he was an affiliation man, but he would not want to see Mages stripped of all of its treasures. Roland assured him that would not happen, and he asked how they could force them to give what they didn't want to anyway. All of their forces that they would need for such things were off fighting Farson. He then answered that there was probably another 150 head throughout Magus. Jonas then in the distance said something, and everyone around him laughed, including Susan. Renfrew mentioned how lovely Susan was, and Roland asked if she was the mayor's niece or cousin. Coral finally spoke up. I don't know if we really heard her speak yet, least of all to Roland and them. She was very silent at the door. We've heard a little bit about her in the Traveler's Rest when we had Eldred Jonas sitting there playing cards and shit, but I don't know that if we've heard her talk yet. But she finally spoke up and laughed at that and told Roland that whoever gave him his education on the real world did a very poor job of it. And she said she was his. And then she says a word, but then it doesn't really give it. It says, but the word was so thick with the dialect that Roland could not grasp it, and he asked for clarification. And Renfrew tried to doll it up, but Coral shut him up and said the word was Shivan, which meant his sidewife, or as her great-grandmother would have said, his whore, of a certain kind at least. Roland asked that she was his Jilly, and Coral agreed and said not consummated until the reap, and he was none too happy about that. Coral said Susan's father would die of shame if he saw the situation. Roland could not help but imagine the mayor lying with Susan in bed. It's a little bit more detailed than that, but let's just leave it at that. Then his eyes found Olive at the other end of the table. She had no hate or anger in her eyes, as that would have actually made it easier. But instead, Roland saw only humility and hope. Humble, hopeful, and unhappy eyes, I guess is the right way to word that. So he only saw humble, hopeful, and unhappy eyes. Again, mentioned earlier in the chat, our heart breaks for Olive for sure. Feel very bad for her in all this. And I mentioned when that was brought up in the chat before that moment that we talked about before was not the end of it. But here's the rest of it, as she's sitting at the other end of the table with a lot of sadness. Now he understood why he had thought she seemed sad. She had every right to be. More laughter from the mayor's end of the table, and even Jonas was laughing this time again, and without Cuthbert. So apparently it isn't just Cuthbert's magical superpowers that cause Eldred to laugh. Although I would suspect if it's real laughs or fake laughter from a guy like him. More laughter, let's see. Roland thought that if he had been wearing his guns, he might have pulled. He may have pulled one of his guns and put a bullet in Susan's, quote, cold and whoring heart. But he thought to himself, who did he think he was fooling? A server put down food in front of him, and he never felt less like eating than he did now. But he would force himself to eat, if nothing than for optics. So my notes here, I always love Renfrew worrying about telling the truth, as it might hurt them. Like, I don't know why, but anytime I'm getting to this section on rereads, that line always sticks with me, where he's like, man, if I answer this, it's not going to come back to bite me in the ass. Is it? Like, that's not the exact line, but that's the line. I always remember that line because it's just so real, you know, like, I don't know, like we obviously don't live in a time where, you know, like you have like tax collectors that like come to your door and ask like what you own or things like that, or like this kind of thing where you've got like, you know, an army person coming to ask like what you might have that you might donate to the forces or whatever. It's such an alien thing to us, but I just love like that it feels so real that, like, you know, man, if I answer this, it's not gonna fucking ruin me, is it? So I love it. It just feels very, very real, and I love it. It's also slightly humorous. Going on, so finally Coral speaks up, and not only to scoff at Roland's thought process, but seemingly to stab him with the truth and deride his understanding of the real world. I mean, I don't think she knows exactly how much what she's saying hurt Roland, but she's certainly being very blunt with it. So Roland, of course, is devastated by this news, and some hatred coming into his heart for Susan in light of this. Because of his mother and all that infidelity that is going on in his own life, that certainly is adding to all of the things going on in his heart here. So let's move on over to subchapter 10. This will be our second to last subchapter of this episode. Later, the tables had been removed and people were dancing in two adjacent circles that were made up of boys and the other with girls. The circles revolved in opposite directions, all holding hands, and when the music stopped, the two people who were at where the circles met would then dance, join together and dance in the middle of the girls' circle. So it's a very cool visual of how this all works, and it's almost like a weird musical chairs dance thing. It says the lead musician led this with a keen eye to find the most ridiculous dance partners: tall woman, short man, fat woman, skinny man, old woman, young man, as examples of the kind of lineups that he would cause to happen. It says Cuthbert ended up dancing with a woman old enough to be his great-grandma. Then at one point the music stopped with Roland and Susan paired up. For a moment, he could do nothing but stare at her, and then they finally locked up and began to dance. She leaned in close and thanked him for his discretion and propriety, and he responded that he can be discreet, but propriety, he is amazed that she even knows that word. She is stunned and asks why he speaks so. The music stops before he can answer, which is fine, because he had no idea how he would have answered. She curtsied and bowed, and everyone clapped. They both returned to their respective circles. He wished he could be with her alone in the dark where they could put their false faces aside. Short subchapter there, but pretty meaningful one, as obviously now Roland, with full understanding of the truth, is basically, he's very prickish to Susan. So definitely feel bad for her. We've obviously been in her head enough to know that, like, she's not in this situation of her own doing. She's been manipulated into this. She's being strong-armed. She's being emotionally manipulated. She's being just everything. She's just in a very bad situation she doesn't want to be in. We know that. And so to hear Roland talking so hurtfully to her about something he doesn't really understand is kind of tough for sure. This is one I can't wait to see on screen. You can just picture what this dance thing looks like, and it would be really cool to see. I can't wait to see Cuthbert dancing with a very old woman as well. It'll just be awesome. Cuthbert's he's one of my favorites. Nothing ridiculous about Roland and Susan though, so I wonder why the musician paired them up. Caw perhaps. It just seems weird that it says, he's pairing up all these like strikingly different ones, and then this one that is not strikingly different at all. They're two young people, not anything that's like physically too different from them. So yeah, very interesting thing as to why did this pairing happen. And then my last note here, Roland with the proverbial slap to Susan. Ouch. Yeah, you kind of, I mean, we obviously know Roland is quite a bastard as an adult, but to see kind of that adult Roland shittiness coming through here in the younger Roland is tough to see, for sure. Okay, so moving on to chapter 6 now. We're only going to get into one subchapter of this. Once we cover this and where we end off here with this, it may be evident as to why I'm stopping. Technically, I think, well, and even time-wise, though, we ended up going fine, because I think my ultimate percentage ended up having me doing one more subchapter, but it would have left us cutting off in a very, very, very bad place, in my opinion. So I felt way better about doing this next subchapter and then ending it, and it looks like time-wise that's going to work out just fine. So I'm glad for that. So let's go into chapter 6, which is subtitled Shimi. And let's start off with chapter 1, and that is where we will begin and end this, and we will pick up with subchapter 2. God damn, what would that be? So it would be March. I'm looking at the calendar here. 23rd, I think. So yeah, that'll be a big one. All right, so subchapter 1. Around 10, the trio of the inner barony boys made their manners and slipped into the summer night. Cordelia told someone that they must have been tired, and the man said, nope, they are like rats going to explore the woodpile, and it would probably be hours before they actually went to bed. So I do love there that Cordelia, because I don't think that she's necessarily one that's lying and putting on an act on a lot. I think she's pretty earnest, and I think that in her earnestness, she thinks they're going back to go to bed. So it shows that as paranoid and whatever she is about Susan, there's kind of like, God damn it, Cordelia stuck in my head. Coral Thorin. Much like Coral Thorin derided Roland for not knowing how the world works, it does seem like Cordelia equally, in some ways, doesn't know how the world works. That these boys are now going to go out and look through the town and probably look at whatever. I mean, I would say, looking for trouble is how me and my friends would have said it, but not obviously that we were actually going to get into trouble. But that's what we would have said, or paint the town red, whatever. They were going out to find some shenanigans and tomfoolery. Let's see. Olive left not long after claiming a headache. The mayor and his inner circle were meeting in his study. The talk was brief but intense. The ranchers expressed relief that they were so young. Jonas did not respond but only smiled. By midnight, Susan was home and undressing for bed. She remembered giving the necklace back to the mayor, who locked it up back at Mayor's house before she came home, and he had kissed her on the mouth and fumbled at her breasts, and he had said that he burned for the reaping, and each summer day felt like an age. She was brushing her hair after remembering such horrible things. In her room, she was so angry at what Will Dearborn had said to her, but she was also angry at herself. And there's a really cool direct quote I wanted to pull here. It's another saying from her father here, internal monologue, but it is italicized as though it is her father speaking. It says, "There are 3 things you can do in any situation, girl," her father had told her once. "You can decide to do a thing, you can decide not to do a thing, or you can decide not to decide." The last, her dad had never quite come out and said, but he hadn't needed to, was the choice of weaklings and fools. So the choice to not decide something is only for weaklings and fools was the thought of her father, even if he never said it. She had allowed herself to be dragged into this horrible situation, kind of through indecision, so that's why she's mad at herself as well. So seeing the mayor and the powerful people meeting to discuss the events shows us most of this evening had been to gather intel for them, as well as to gauge the boys. We obviously know the boys are doing the same thing to try to gather intel and read the lay of the land here in town, but it's showing us that indeed the town is playing the exact same game against them. So again, as Roland thought as he walked into the door at the beginning of at the end of last episode, he said, "Let the games begin." Well, indeed, there has been nothing but games all throughout this evening. So Susan is mad, and the quote from her dad is pretty great. It's a fun one. Again, there are 3 things you can do. I'm going to just say it in my own thing and not like the mages speak. You can either decide to do a thing, you can decide not to do a thing, or you can decide not to decide. But the unspoken part of that was the last one there is a thing for weak people, the weak and the foolish. So kind of an interesting thing there for sure. So moving on here, Olive was in her own room. It had been a decade since she had shared a bed with Hart. When she finally found herself alone, she wept, but not for long. She was dry-eyed and hollow as a dead tree. What is worse is Hart had no idea how humiliated she was, not just for herself, but for him too. As he was so preoccupied with Susan, he did not realize that so many people, including Reimer, were laughing at him. Most humiliating of all for herself, though, was that despite all of that, she still loved Hart. She also knew that some kind of intrigue was afoot, something dangerous and dishonorable. Hart knew little of it, only what Reimer and Jonas wanted him to know. She reflected that there was a time that Hart would have never let himself be played by people like Reimer and Jonas. But that was before Susan. I believe I didn't put it in my recap, but she also says something along the lines of there would have been a time that Hart wouldn't have let Jonas have more than one meal in the town before being, sent away and not allowed to stay. She turned off her light and laid awake until dawn. So there is the third and coup de grace of heartbreak for poor Olive Thorin, as we see the face that she's putting on. We see behind it, we see the true sadness and deadness seemingly inside of her for all this. And the most heartbreaking of all is that despite all of it, she somehow still loves Hart Thorin. So definitely feel bad for her in all this. And then it says by 1 o'clock, the public rooms were emptied except for the cleaning women who did their chores under the silent eye of Eldred Jonas. By 2, even they were done and gone, as well as and the place slept. And then the last thing of this subchapter says, but the travelers rest, the night was still young. So that's the perfect ending and tease into the next episode, I think. So my notes here, I really feel for Olive, not only her heartache for the cheating husband, but also her hurt at seeing how foolish she had become. Also her suspicion that something was going on. So obviously we know that everyone in the town's not privy to what's going on, but the fact that she's smart enough that she doesn't know the details, but she knows something's afoot and going on. So she's a very clever person as well. Also, Jonas is a creep. Why is he just sitting there watching the cleaning staff? Fuck off, dude. That's my notes there. Like, I don't think he's like being like a sexual creep, but it's just like, just the sinister fucking hard case that's just going to sit there and watch like working people do their job. Like, fuck off. Not a fan of that. And then no sleep for all of that night. That's kind of heartbreaking as well. So, so that is that is where we are leaving off. I will go ahead and let's move to the spoiler section. I have only got one thing, but we had something in the chat earlier that I can address once we move into the spoiler section. So let me go ahead and hit the alert and then change the slide.
Warning, spoilers ahead. Warning, spoilers ahead. Warning, spoilers ahead.
Okay, so we are now in the spoiler section. So if you've not finished all of the Dark Tower books, this is the time to check out. Turn the episode off. Maybe when you finish reading the series, you can come back and maybe the episode will still be left off here where you could just listen in and not be spoiled. But if you continue listening, you've hopefully read everything because there will be some spoilers in this section. So first of all, I will address in the chat earlier, I don't know if they're still in here, but None Ya Business asked how many times did Jake die. That would be the first time he dies to go to Midworld, then Roland drops him, and then he dies for the third and final time with the van saving Stephen King from an untimely death. So, yes, that is 3 deaths for Jake. There's been a number of times over the years that Peter and I have joked about that, where, we've talked about, I think it was even when we were talking about, because now our March Insanity one is worst Dark Tower moments. I think we've talked about just sad moments or whatever, and there's been times where somebody said like Jake dying, and we've joked and said like, well, which one? So sadly, Jake, not to be blithe about the fact that Jake is one of the more mistreated characters in King's pantheon, and has died multiple times, but it is kind of funny because you can't just say Jake dying because that doesn't narrow it down. And then Jack 4 times if you count his hopeful old age. Yeah, that's true. I mean, if you go go look at the one in the alternate universe through the doorway with Susan with the what was it, Nozzle? There's something that gave us the idea. It definitely wasn't a world we were familiar with. It was definitely one of the parallel worlds. So that's true. That, I mean, but then again, that would be a different Jake of a different. Oh, I guess there's still Jake's a different. I don't know. That is a huge conversation that'll never get resolved because it's like trying to untie Gordian's knot a little bit. Because yeah, if you start talking about all the multiverses of Jakes, yeah, there's countless Jake deaths. But the Jake that we had generally spent time with, he died 3 main times, and of course down the road, he would have died again. The one that Susanna went through the door to be with Eddie and Jake. That Jake would eventually die as well, of course. So hopefully, yes, a very old age, as Jack said. Hopefully that's the death that awaits that Jake Chambers. Or Jake Dean. I don't know. They're brothers in that world, so I don't know if it's even Jake Chambers. And then Baraki says, or if you want to get meta about it, 1 for each level of the tower. Yeah, exactly. That's where it gets into the freaking, I'm going to go cross-eyed if I think too hard about this. Because, yeah, if you go talk about every multiverse and every level, I mean, which one was the twinner? Was it Bobby Garfield? That was the exact twinner of Jake. We've obviously talked over the years about the number of twinners that seem like they could be Jake twinners. Danny Torrance, there's a few of them, but I think it's Bobby Garfield is the one that, because it's what's his name, Ted Brodigan, that when he sees Jake, he's like thinks that it was his friend. No, yeah, is it? Yeah, Ted Brodigan. And is it Bobby Garfield, his buddy? Because yeah, he thinks it's him, and it's not. So it's like that's a twinner, obviously. But yeah, if you want to get into that realm, there are infinite Jake deaths to talk about, most likely. And then Jack says the car of the Takuro spirit, I think, was there. I think that's what it was. Yeah, I knew there was one of those. It was either the Monarchs or the Takuro spirit or the Nozzle. One of the things is seen on a shirt or a hat of one of those 2 Dean brothers, the different Dean brothers, to give us an idea that is a different world than what we've experienced before. Then Jack says, very true. You can go back around and say only one death is the true death in the Keystone Earth. Yeah, there's that too, exactly. But in the sense of when we generally talk in the confines of the story, there are 3 Jake deaths that we experience. Him getting hit by the car, him being that is dropped by Roland, and then him that is hit by the van. So yeah, and then Cody says, yes, it's Bobby Garfield. Yeah, I was blanking on Everything's Eventual. I was starting to worry that I was saying that kid's name, but I'm now blanking on his name. I was worried that Bobby Garfield was the one from Everything's Eventual and not the one from Hearts in Atlantis, or Low Men and Yellow Coats, technically. But no, yeah, Bobby Garfield is the name of the kid in Low Men and Yellow Coats. So that's the one that, Ted Brodigan is like almost like thunderstruck when he sees Jake. He's like, oh my God, Bobby, it's you. And obviously it's not, but so there is the twinner thing as well. So. All right, so then spoiler discussion. The only thing I really have for the spoiler discussion, well, actually, first of all, I want to just mention, now that we're in the spoiler section, the reason I ended up, quote-unquote, cutting this episode short, even though we ended up hitting the exact time that we needed to anyway, so I guess we probably wouldn't have covered Subchapter 2, but my percentages would have had me in Subchapter 2, but that actually would have put us into the showdown at the Traveler's Rest, and it would have had us cutting off midway through. I think it would have had us cutting off right after Keithburg shows up. Something like that. So I was way more keen to just ending it here so that the next episode, which again I mentioned is in the 2nd episode of March, will indeed be the most anticipated episode for me. When we started this book club series, one of the things I could not wait to get to was Wizard and Glass, and namely the Traveler's Rest. So I cannot wait to get to that. I think we talked about it tail into last year, where when we first moved into this book, the percentages, if we carried it from the last book, it actually would have had it been where we would have been like the first episode of January, the first book club of January this year would have been the Traveler's Rest. But then the book ended up, we ended up having to adjust the percentages because this book was bigger than the last book. And ended up putting it down until I think it was April that we were talking about, that we would have been covering it. But then of course Peter had to step away. So the percentages ended up going up because with it's just me yakking away, I end up covering more ground quicker. So what was April is now going to be March. So next time I cannot wait to talk about the Traveler's Rest. And I do believe I'm going to try as hard as I can to get that all in one episode as well. So even if that's a long-ass episode, I want to cover the entire event of the Traveler's Rest and get us out of there. Not necessarily to like the jail cell and the talk or the jail and talking with Avery to like shake and make up. We can save that for the time after, but I want to get through the entirety of the events of the Traveler's Rest in one episode if humanly possible. So then the only spoiler discussion thing I have from this section though, once again, are we seeing some foreshadowing here? Because this is the second time or third time in this book so far that burning has come up, because again, Mayor Thorin saying I burn for reaping. It just is very, very uncomfortable on rereads, because we know that when reaping comes, there is a burning that will happen, and it'll be a lot more real than just burning with lust. And it just, again, with the fact that burning has been brought up 2 or 3 times now, and we're not even that deep into the book yet. I mean, I guess we kind of are. But if you remove the Blaine stuff, I don't think we're even a quarter away through this story yet. So to have burning being brought up that many times makes me wonder if King kind of knew how this story was going to end. Again, we know from the previous books that we know that it's going to end tragically for Susan. Some of the hints that Roland has dropped throughout this entire story have given us, up to this point, give us the idea this is not going to be a happy ending. But I don't know if we've had anything in previous books that told us that Susan was burned alive. And the only reason that I even like doubt that King like truly knew now is because how King has always said that he always writes one word at a time. A lot of times he doesn't even have the final destination in mind. He just writes and sees where the story carries him. So knowing that, it just makes me wonder with this one, is this an exception where King kind of knew from the very beginning what Susan's, what her death was going to be? Or did he come and add some of these little comments in after he finished the entire thing and he went back through on a second draft, or after an edit or something and went and dropped in a couple references? Or I don't know. Or is it just complete coincidence that burning has been brought up a couple times in this book, and we know that ultimately it is going to end in a very fiery fashion. So yes, another one of those. So again, don't know King's writing process for this book, or what he knew and what he didn't know. But it's very interesting that he has had a couple references to burning so far in this book. And Brock says he certainly had plenty of time to plan it. Sheesh, yeah, no shit. There's that too, exactly. The longest gap between books and leaving it on the biggest cliffhanger of the series too, with the Blaine stuff. So, yeah, he had plenty of time, but I just wonder, because that would generally be breaking King's normal standard of how he does things. But I wonder if in his mind he kind of knew that, like, whatever. And I don't know, maybe it was even just like trying to figure out like what does reaping look like, and they're going to burn stuffy guys, and I just don't know how it all evolved. But it's very interesting that we've had so many burn references, and I do know that going through the rest of the story, every spoiler section that has a section that mentions burning like this, I am going to bring it up, because I want to track how many times does King potentially foreshadow the end of this story. So but that is it for this episode. Let me go ahead and let me one more time call out the March Insanity stuff. That is next episode. I'll be unveiling the bracket. So that means that you have until the 23rd, which is 13 days from today, to submit your nominations. Submit that through social media, submit that on email, submit that wherever. Again, just send me as many as you want, because the ones that get the most repeat things, the 16 that have the most nominations, are going to be the 16 that make the bracket. So again, the topic is worst Dark Tower moments. That is not meta. That is what are the moments in universe that are the worst moments. Again, the showdown at Traveler's Rest was the best moment last year. We want the mirror image of that. What is the worst moment in the Dark Tower series? So what are the nominations for that? Send them in. 13 days. I'll go ahead and give you the social media stuff and email stuff, which is the places you could definitely hit me up with those nominations. You can hit me up email-wise, show@darktowerpalaver.com. Again, show@darktowerpalaver.com. Facebook.com/darktowerpalaver. At Twitter, we're at darktowerpod. Instagram, darktowerpalaver. Blue Sky @darktowerpalaver.bsky.social. Very clunky, but that is where it is. On any of those places, I should hopefully have some sort of post about the March Insanity nominations. If there is, just go ahead and comment on there. But if not, if you're on like Facebook, for instance, or even Instagram or Twitter, whatever, if you could also just respond to the actual post where I post this episode when I get it posted in the into the podcast feed. Wherever, any of those places, send in your nominations. Can't wait to unveil that And then next episode, we'll also have all the details in terms of how the vote's going to go, where to vote, how to vote, and all that kind of fun stuff. So can't wait to tune in for that, as well as whatever news has been happening in the Stephen King and Dark Tower world. Then if you want to find us on any podcasting service of your choice, you can find us anywhere. If you want to subscribe or review on any of those, we appreciate it. If you want to join the live streams, as everyone here in the live and the chat has, you can do that here at youtube.com/darktowerpalaver. If you want to, of course, like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications if you're here on YouTube, I'd appreciate that. It appeases the algorithm gods. And then if you want to support the show, you can do that at patreon.com/darktowerpalaver. And that is all of the outro stuff. And of course, I sign off as always, by saying long days and pleasant nights. All right, everyone in the chat, thank you all for joining and being part of the conversation, helping me with words that won't come to me, filling in blanks where I'm doubting myself or missing something. It's always awesome to have you all as part of the conversation. So we'll be back in a fortnight for the roundtable and unveiling the March Insanity, and can't wait to get to the Traveler's Rest next book club, which is going to be not... So we got 2 weeks from now, we got a roundtable. Then 2 weeks after that will be another roundtable. So there's going to be 2 in a row because since we flipped them, that's going to cause a back-to-back thing. But then after that, the second episode in March, we will be getting to the Traveler's fucking Rest. I cannot wait. So excited for that. So thank you all. You guys are awesome. Love having you as part of the show. And I will sign off and say goodbye. See you next time. And Brock said, yes, thanks, Ted, for continuing. I look forward to this so much. Yes, indeed. Thank you. And thank you all for being part of it as well. There was a bit of a doubt in my mind. I enjoy doing this so much, but without Peter, there was a time there I was like, man, can I even do this alone? But honestly, the live chat part of it, you guys help out a ton. And I am just so excited for all this stuff that I couldn't possibly imagine going into a Flanagan Dark Tower series in the near future, hopefully, as well as like the book clubs and stuff. I couldn't imagine not finishing this stuff out. It would nag at me for sure if I ended up, and that wasn't a long thing I thought about for a long time, but it was certainly something because podcasting alone can be a treacherous thing at times. It can be tough to just sit here and talk for hours at a time, but you guys help out a lot, and I do appreciate the support. So I will see you guys in a couple weeks for the round table. I don't know what number, but see you guys then.